The deal wasn't fair. You only want to know how unique a Zafarkraken is because you're planning on copying my energy and using it. TSK, you cheater, she cursed. No, I wasn't planning that. And you said deal. You agreed, he protested, and she stood, holding a cheeky, evil smile. Maybe don't trust too easily next time. Makes you quite easy to fool, you know? Zafri said, moving to the lab in satisfaction. She had learned his secrets and even managed to keep hers. It was an absolute win, but she had not taken 3 steps when she felt a hand grab her wrist and yank her back. You! She shouted, her hands instantly shifting back into tentacles that made Ryuk's grip slip. The instant she was released, the tentacles coiled like whips, lashing for his face. But he dodged them at the last second, grabbed onto them and pulled hard. Zafri was sent flying straight toward him, and he caught her neck, twisting her upside down. She landed with her back against the bed, gasps escaping her lips from the intense speed. Turning up, she found his glowing purple eyes staring down at her. Get off me, she hissed, her tentacles slashing once more, but they were easily pinned down to the bed. She resisted with all her strength, trying to push him off, but ultimately failed, her chest swelling up and down from exhaustion. He was like a mountain that couldn't be budged. While I won't try to force things onto you, a deal is a deal, and I won't get off until you agree to it, he said firmly, eyes filled with conviction. TCH, fine. Her reluctant words made him grin triumphantly as he finally backed off. I'll only ever explain it once, so you'd better listen attentively, Zafri said with a humph as she sat upright. Ryuk turned to her, his ears peaked. But then, he noticed her simply staring blankly at him for a long while, and he asked, What? The question seemed to snap her out of it finally. A bizarre pink shade spread across her cheeks, and she held her head, wiggling it awkwardly. I was just thinking of the best way to explain, she muttered. Ryuk exhaled slowly and watched as her gaze finally focused. Zafarkrakens are different from most krakens due to one simple, but crucial thing, she began. Their creation line. Creation line? That was a word he had never heard before. Most krakens' creation lines drown in abyssal entropy, which also made it that almost all of them use abyssal energy only. In fact, only 3 lines of krakens in existence don't have abyssal energy as their main source. Of those 3, the Zafarkrakens are one, and we were chosen by the Apex line instead, granting us a special type of Apex energy called Oregon. Oregon, Ryuk thought, and she continued. As you said before, Apex energy is usually the amalgamation of elemental attributes, and Oregon is no different. What fuses together to form Oregonthon? He asked curiously, and she replied, 3 elements: light, space, and primordial soul essence. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharp as she continued. Imagine combining light, like a blazing sun that burns away darkness. Space, like the endless sky stretching without limits. And soul essence, the invisible life force within every creature. Put them all together, and what you will get is Oregon energy. An energy that doesn't just burn or freeze, it reaches directly into the soul. How does it even work? Ryuk asked. She thought quietly for a moment before saying, Fire burns the body. Frost lowers the temperature, causing the body to freeze. Oregon has nothing to do with your flesh. It touches your soul directly, like a light shining into your soul space and pulling at it. In demonstration, she stretched out her hand, a purple-blue glow surrounding her fingers, and reached forward toward his chest. Ryuk didn't flinch, though he felt quite alarmed, when he watched her glowing hand phase through his ribs. He didn't feel her fingers sinking into his chest, like touching against his blood or ribs, but he felt something far worse, an invisible grip latching onto him, that made his heartbeat skyrocket. It wasn't like being touched on a particular part of his body, but as if something grabbed at every inch of his being all at once. Can you feel it? Zafri asked, eyes boring into his. Right now, I'm holding directly onto your soul. This is only possible with Oregon. so you can imagine it as a glowing hand that bypasses your physical body and grabs straight at your soul. She slowly pulled her hand back, and Ryuk unconsciously let out a breath of relief. That was terrifying, he muttered under his breath. If just touching your soul feels terrifying, imagine if I pulled it out of you and smashed it to pieces, she said with a wicked grin. Ryuk instinctively sat farther away. I'm guessing it isn't that easy, he replied. In his experience, broken powers always had weaknesses to keep them in check. You're right, souls are heavy to pull out, but Orogon can be used in many ways. I'll only tell you 3, she said, raising 3 fingers. The first is soul striking. Attacks go straight to the spirit, ignoring most armor or defenses, just like I did now. The second is purification. Darkness, curses, and corruption are instantly burned away. The third is assimilation. Other energies, fire, frost, void, even abyssal, can be absorbed and refined into Orogon, not in your copycat way, but more of draining out the energy from a person's soul. Ryuk's eyes widened. To think such an energy exists, and I had no idea at all, he mumbled. Whenever he thought of the soul, he always connected it with Etherius, the energy of the mind and spirit. But to think Apex also had a branch that touched upon the soul, he had never imagined it. You haven't heard of it because, while there are creatures that can use Orogon, most can't handle it. 90% of those who awaken it end up dying quickly, one way or another, she said coldly. Oh? Why is that? It's connected to the forbidden tittle of Orogon. Most creatures can't handle Orogon because it's too pure an energy, and what's more, too heavy. Their souls would collapse trying to contain it. She said this, a notion Ryuk really couldn't completely understand, but now he could at least imagine what it felt like to possess Orogon. Happy now? She asked with a humph, rolling from her seat to stay beside Iris, who had already quickly fallen asleep. Hey, you haven't shown me your unique skills yet, he added, but all he got was a scoff. I already explained to you most of the important skills. You also didn't show me your hurricane skills, did you? She said, something he couldn't really argue with, and in the end he could only drop it. Suddenly, he felt a thrumming from the side of his head, and a moment later, his Ama comms opened up. He found a message bolded, his heart quickening in high hopes. But when he opened it, it wasn't quite what he was expecting. He couldn't identify a name on the message, just a couple of weird symbols that showed whoever owned it hadn't deleted the initial auto-generated name and put in theirs. But the message read, "Need some blood?" His eyes furrowed in thought. Only a single person could have sent him that. His hand reached out and he typed, "Are you genuinely reaching out to me? Asking me to come all the way to your place for some blood? How tyrannical." He sent it back, waiting a couple of seconds before a reply came. "I really need it. Got myself into a little trouble." Odette in trouble? Yeah, right, like hell I'm believing that, he thought, unimpressed. But then his eyebrows furrowed when he saw the green light on the comms disappear, meaning the Ama comm signal was off. The only way for the Ama comm signal to be off was when one falls asleep, in other words, unconscious. This is weird. He didn't waste any more time sitting as he rose to his feet and moved to the elevator. Zafir heard the sound of his footsteps, but she didn't attempt to ask him where he was going. She only watched him leave. When she felt his presence completely disappear, she sat up on the sofa, turned over to look at Iris to confirm she was asleep, then moved to the TV and switched it on. Quickly browsing through, she clicked on a save option, and there, she found a video she had previously discovered but couldn't watch due to Iris and Ryuk's presence. She could only quickly save it, and now she could watch it. In the video, a chaotic fight was captured by the satellite. Her eyebrows furrowed as she gazed at the being, completely covered in thick, purple veins, with a terrifying, explosive brute power that crushed everything in his path. The purple runes on him were familiar, but even more so, the timing of the fight completely matched when Ryuk said he needed to be somewhere. Is this him? No, I'm sure it's him. To think. It was early in the night, just around 8:23, when Ryuk arrived before Odette's mansion gate. It was as gigantic as ever, the walks around continuing with nothing amiss. He entered and pushed open the mansion door. He was expecting some purple woman in a crown sitting on the sofa with a mischievous grin that couldn't conceal her pride. But he was proven wrong. She wasn't sitting on the golden sofa, and the entire living room space was empty and unnervingly quiet. His comms appeared, and he tried to check on her connectivity. It was still down, meaning she was still unconscious. He switched off the comms and continued up the stairs. Perhaps she's in one of the rooms. And true enough, it didn't take long before his ears picked up on a heartbeat. He navigated his way through the ginormous mansion and came upon a door. He knocked twice but didn't get a reply, so he grabbed the knob and pushed the door open. Before him was a cozy room of purple, dim purple lighting diffusing from the lamp on the bedside desk. It faintly illuminated a figure half hidden within the sheets. "Hey Odette, you okay?" he asked, stepping closer to her. There was no reply, but when he arrived by her side, he finally knew why, and the scene made a faint gasp escape his lips. The woman on the bed was the same Odette he knew, but right now, there was something different. On her neck, there was a dark patch of shadowy veins that thrummed as if alive, and in their center, a gash of darkness roughly carved across the side of her neck and down to her shoulders. One look and he could tell she had been slashed by something and, from the squirming dark veins, also poisoned by it. How is this possible? Odette is stronger than I am. Just who was she fighting with? She's 100% out. The system notification blinked as he looked down at it. Epic quest. Defeat a Nihil is still ongoing. The flashing panel made an idea appear in his mind, only to be pushed away just as quickly as it came, and he asked, "Do you really consider stabbing an unconscious person to death as a defeat?" He asked the system, and it replied, "So far, the stab leads to her death. Then it's still a defeat." "Deactivate system," he ordered, and the panel disappeared. While he saw something alarming, someone like Odette being knocked out cold by something or someone was a signal that if he had fought that thing, he would have most likely met his end. All the system saw was an opportunity for Ryuk to finally complete the epic quest by killing her while she was fully knocked out. It was the one imperfect thing about the system. It was too logical. A faint wheezing from Odette pulled him out of his thoughts, and he climbed onto the bed to get a closer look at the gash. It was clearly the reason for her unconsciousness, and Ryuk only needed 30 seconds of studying before he figured out what was really happening and how to cure it. The thing on Odette's neck was poison, horrible poison. His hands morphed into claws, and he silently slashed open the clothes on her arms, revealing her skin. On her purple skin, the same dark veins remained, but they had lessened slightly. Her immune system is already fighting against the poison and has even cleared some of it up, but it has also been weakened at the same time. It needs a boost to continue the fight. And truly, there was only one way he knew. His right hand reached for her jaw, gently pushing it down, opening a slight gap between her lips. Then his clawed left hand brushed against his own skin, drawing forth droplets of blood. A total of 3 drops fell into her open lips before the mark on his neck instantly closed. Ryuk turned to the dark spot on her neck, watching the veins squirm violently. It was clear the battle with her immune system had begun once more. But then, on top of that, Ryuk's hands ignited. White flames burned across his claws, the sigil of white flames, and he stretched them forward toward the poisoned gap on her neck. The second they touched, the dark veins squirmed crazily, besieged from both sides, and naturally, they began to vanish rapidly, but not without a fight. They tried to corrupt Ryuk's white flames, leaving a shadowy tint across them, but Ryuk simply pulled back his hand, deactivated the flames, and then moved his second hand in, resuming the burning. Even with Odette's boosted system and his white flames, it still took a full 10 minutes before the last shadow finally escaped her body, and her skin regained its healthy purple once more. Although the gash itself hadn't fully closed, at least the poison was gone. He exhaled in relief, collapsing onto his butt as small droplets of sweat rained down his face. But then, a sudden flicker of bright light flashed within the room, and in the next instant, the world around Ryuk blurred with speed. Something slammed into him, pinning him flat against the bed. The sound of claws tearing out rang as Ryuk froze in place. He was down on his back, and above him was Odette, the depth of her eyes, a revolving abyss of darkness. Her hands had morphed into gigantic, deadly claws radiating terrifying sharpness, coated in the heavy abyssal energy unique to the Nihils. "Odette, are you okay?" The question made her pause, her abyssal eyes staring blankly at him for a moment, and he witnessed the dark colors fade, replaced by her usual purple. "Ryuk?" she whispered, her claws shifting back to normal, and it rose to her neck. She rubbed it gently, finally confirming the poison was gone. Moreover, the squirming, harrowing voices in her head, along with the soul-splitting pain, had also vanished. Did he? A thought occurred to her, but it slipped away, just as she felt something warm on her lips. Blood. His blood. When she turned to look down at him, all of a sudden, her heartbeat pounded once and loudly, and the next thing she knew was a crazy desire raging through her body, setting it aflame. Her eyes burned with incredible lust that Ryuk could instantly see, watching her lower closer to him. "Hey, Odette, you're Alra." The sound of fangs sinking into flesh echoed. "Ah!" A moan and a gasp rang out in the bedroom. "It's different." The thought echoed in Ryuk's head as he felt the world starting to move around, strength being siphoned off him. The bite this time wasn't like any bite he had felt before. For one, there was no stinging pain. Instead, a strange, crazed rush surging through his body. It was a feeling he couldn't describe, as though his brain was shutting down his reasoning. His hands automatically shifted into claws, gripping tightly at her waist. Odette herself had lost all control to the desire. The blood she drank was no longer just the sweet blood she had grown addicted to. Now it was like a drug. Every droplet sent waves of madness through her veins, fueling her hunger. She pressed deeper against him, wanting more, but in the next moment, her fangs were forced away as she was pushed back onto the bed, his hands pressing onto the bed by the side of her head. "Ah!" Turbid, white-hot breath poured from both their lips, the air around them growing both hot and cold at once. The bizarre desire clawed at both of their minds as they stared into each other's eyes, purple gazes locked in a storm of desire they couldn't explain. Her hands rose to his cheeks, her lips leaning forward, this time, not for his neck, but for his lips. The sight made Ryuk's heart pound louder and louder, his eyes gently zipping to a close, but just a moment, an image flashed through his mind. A golden-haired girl pouting with an innocent face. His eyes snapped open, and a sharp purple gleam flashed through them. "No!" He forced the word out, shifting his lips by just a few inches, and her lips landed on his neck, but her fangs didn't sink in this time. His head grew fuzzy from losing so much blood, and his arms lost their strength, his eyes fully shutting, and he fell to the side on the bed. Odette remained where she was, her hands pressed against her chest, trying to calm her tumultuous heartbeat. Took a full minute before she finally felt it settle. Her purple eyes blinked twice, her reasoning returning, along with a clear focus on the world around her. And when it did, memories flashed, causing her to turn her head to the side. He was already fast asleep, his breath slow and calm. The fang marks on his neck were as clear as day, a tiny amount of blood dripping out of them, and her hands moved, rubbing it off and licking off the blood. So alluring. A moment and consciousness eluded him as he descended into darkness. But after a time that didn't seem either long or short, his eyes opened. He looked before him into a void of dark, and right above him, something floated down. A grimoire of black, with star-like purple motes hanging around it. Unconsciously, Ryuk's hands reached for it, and it landed in his palms. The second it did, the purple motes trailed down the grimoire, surrounded him, and a force lifted his body from its lying position, and he found himself hovering in the void. His reasoning returned, and as he turned to look at the grimoire, a glint flashed in his eyes. This is the grimoire of abyssal energy. Odette's unique abyssal energy, to be exact. It's finally done? He thought, unable to believe it. He had checked the grimoire last time with his bloodline manifestation, and it had only been a quarter formed. Yet now it was fully formed. He opened it, flicking through its pages. One thing was immediately clear. The pages weren't white like his other grimoires but pitch black instead. There were no drawings on them, meaning he had not stored any abyssal art. But it still kindled hope in Ryuk's heart. Now I have my void, frost, and abyssal energy back. The only thing missing from my past is Aetherus energy, he thought, relaxing his grasp and watching the grimoire float back to the other two grimoires. For a moment, Ryuk's gaze swept the library, and a thought entered his mind. How amazing would it be if every inch of the Echo Library space were filled with energy grimoires? When Ryuk opened his eyes, he was welcomed by a familiar sight. He was in Odette's room, and he exhaled raggedly, his head throbbing from a headache. "You're up," the voice called from the side, and he turned and found her, currently tying up her hair. He sat up, his hands gripping his head, but it didn't take long for the memory of the time before he fell unconscious to catch up with him. He paused in shock, his face quickly reddening like a tomato. Finally got the flashback? The voice came from mere inches before his face as he lifted his head to find Odette looming over him with a mischievous grin. Unconsciously, his eyes strayed from hers and dropped to her neck. Right now, the gash he remembered on her neck had already closed, leaving not even a single scar. "How did you get that scar?" he asked. Her brows furrowed, and she stepped back, returning to the mirror at the corner of the room. Odette looked into the mirror and saw the scar had completely faded, muttering softly, "Don't worry about it. It's been, what, almost a week or so. What have you been up to anyway?" she asked, curious. "Just working on some things," he replied. "What?" she pressed. "My artifacts. I'm trying to upgrade some of them," she hummed under her breath. "And you? What have you been up to?" he asked, getting off the bed and onto his feet. "I figured sitting around doing nothing would get boring sooner or later, so," she said, pausing a bit before continuing. "I accepted that old Foggy's offer to meet, and we agreed to a little deal. So I ended up doing small missions here and there, and one bigger mission." "Was the bigger mission what almost got you killed?" Ryuk asked, watching as her hands paused for a second before she continued fixing the coat she was wearing. "Got me killed?" she echoed through the mirror, and through it, she got her answer. His obviously expression. "A little poison can't get me killed, Ryuk. All it would have done is knock me out, and after some time, be devoured by my body, and I would wake up perfectly healthy," she said. He asked, "That sometime you mention, how long would that have been?" She hummed underneath her breath, her eyes here and there in thoughts before replying. "Maybe a couple of months? Half a year max. I think that's enough time for someone to cut you into tiny bits and burn them until you become ashes, no?" he said, bringing back her mischievous grin. "You know, in a way, I think you're right. I should have thought twice before retiring back here. You or anyone could have walked in and, like you said, reduced me to tiny bits. I guess I didn't think things through, or—" She trailed off, finally turning away from the mirror and moving closer, lowering her face toward his. "I was sure a certain someone wouldn't cut me up and turn me into ashes," she said, with that same confident grin of hers. His eyebrows tightened. "That was a bet, with the wager being your life." "Stupid, right?" she asked, and he nodded, replying. "But I don't see you falling prey to that word. So the only thing I can think of is that—" he began, pausing as her brows furrowed. "Is what?" she asked, unable to contain her curiosity. "You got tired of living?" he asked, expecting her to burst into laughter or grin mischievously, but instead, she fell silent. His expression shifted to disbelief. You really wish to die?" "Not anymore," she said, standing upright with a focused glare in her eyes. "You really want to know how I got the scar in the first place?" she asked, watching him nod seriously. I got into a fight with someone at the end of the mission. Who? Ryuk asked. An exiled god. Exiled god. Ryuk mused under his breath, his eyebrows furrowing. Surprisingly, that word didn't seem that strange. You've heard it before? Odette asked, noticing his expression, and she watched him nod. Yes. How did you come by it? She asked. When I wanted to become an archguard, I was told I needed to go through a soul purity scan, which will help to determine if my soul is under the abode of forbidden beings. I remember asking her what she meant by forbidden beings, and she mentioned exiled gods amongst the list. Forbidden beings, huh? She's not exactly wrong, I guess, Odette said, and Ryuk's eyebrows furrowed. Of course, I didn't expect to fight an exiled god on that mission. Not that it was an easy mission or anything, but still, it caught me off guard, so I suffered an injury, she said. He asked, suddenly, what happened to the exiled god? Oh, her? She's dead, Odette replied. Ryuk paused in surprise. A god can be killed? He asked, watching Odette chuckle. Anything can be killed, Ryuk, she said with a mischievous grin, but then her grin faded immediately. Her reaction didn't escape Ryuk, and he watched her turn to him, saying, You know what, I take back my words. Some things can't be killed. At least one thing. He asked, What is that? She paused, then flashed him a smirk while pointing a finger at him. Huh. That null form of yours, she said, bringing Ryuk back to his abyssal null transformation. That form belongs to a being that can never be killed. The name appeared in his mind, and Odette said it aloud. Yes, Thaith Vorgoth. He's the only thing I know that can't be killed. Exiled gods, hollow cults, ashen kings, all of them on the other side of our reality, can be killed by him, and he can be killed by none. He is invincible in every sense of that word, Odette said, her eyes gleaming as if she were talking about her favorite celebrity, but Ryuk's face remained blank. Thaith Vorgoth isn't invincible. He's a failure of everything. The thought echoed in his mind. Why do you call him a failure? Odette asked as Ryuk shrugged and moved for the exit. Don't worry about it, he said. Clenching the doorknob, he opened the door, stepped out of the room, and shut it behind him. Could he be at odds with Thaith Vorgoth? Odette wondered silently to herself. She moved, reached for the knob, and disappeared from the room. Where are you even going? The words echoed through the clouds where two figures rippled through the skies, disappearing before they could be seen by those below. The night sky further hid them well. At the front was Ryuk, his snow-white hair whipping around his head. He turned at the words to find Odette flying after him. His speed unconsciously slowed, and she easily caught up. Just flying around, he said with an obvious expression. She suddenly zoomed to his side, and then she knocked into him, sending him blasting through a cloud and out the other end. Hey, watch it! He shouted, watching her giggle mischievously as she lunged and knocked into him once more. But this time, she struck an afterimage instead, as Ryuk appeared at her other side, running his shoulder into hers and sending her flying instead. Oh, you've gotten faster? She said, pausing in the air and lunging forward with intense speed, knocking into him again. But it was also an afterimage. He had moved away, grabbed her hands, and thrown her through another cloud. She burst out, chasing after him faster and faster, but dodged all her attempts until the last one. She was able to send him flying down, but he also managed to grab her wrist at the last second, pulling her with him as they both fell through the clouds. The air whipped crazily around them, but a voice cut through. Hey, Ryuk, Odette called as he looked into her eyes. Her other hand fidgeted around the edges of her coat, and he let go of her wrist. Thank you for saving me, she said. Disbelief clouded his expression, but cleared as he replied. You would have been fine in 6 months anyway, he said with a shrug. Can you just shut up and say you're welcome? She demanded, grabbing at his clothes with a vein popping at her temple from irritation. Okay, fine. You're welcome, he said, watching her humph and let go. But saying thank you doesn't match your vibes, though, he added, only to get a knock on his forehead, making him wince. He stopped his fall and landed on one of the lower clouds, and she also landed, sitting by his side. But why, though? She asked, and he replied, Why what? You said it yourself. Anyone could have sliced me into bits and turned me into ashes in such a vulnerable state, but you chose to quell the poison instead. You could have just ended me and regained your freedom once more, or at least gotten rid of the annoying tyrant that preys on your blood without asking, she said. Ryuk turned his gaze downward while sitting on the clouds and gazed at the Amamoran city below. The view was breathtaking. I have a mission, he said suddenly. What mission? She asked. To one day defeat you, he replied. She looked at him and could tell it wasn't a joke. But I don't see that mission being complete if I stab through your neck while you're unconscious and out already, he said. One day, I will defeat you, Odette, he repeated. And when I do, you'll be at your full, true strength and capability, just like the first time I met you. You'll have no excuse for losing then, he said. Laughter erupted from her lips. I don't think such a day will ever come, she said, her devilish pride and confidence returning, but Ryuk only smiled. Silence reigned, the breeze whipping fast due to such a height, before a voice cut through. Can I ask you something too? He said, and she nodded. Why me? He asked a question she didn't really understand, and he continued. Even though you knew you were so vulnerable, but still chose to call me to your side? Was it you feeling suicidal and wanting me to be the one to end it, which I don't think is true at all? He asked, watching her fall silent. Besides, if blood were all you needed to get rid of the poison, you could have chosen anyone available right then, and never would have needed to risk 6 months in slumber. Why specifically mine? Why you, huh? Odette whispered to herself, her memories drifting back to the events. The exiled god she had met had been summoned as a last desperate move by her enemies to drag her down with them. It was a powerful move, but in the end, she was able to bring an end to it. But before she could, the same ending repeated, with the exiled god also becoming desperate. And in a last act of defiance, it attacked furiously, managing to slash open her neck and injecting its poison into it. But to call it poison was redundant. It was a curse, one that haunted her with the feelings of death. She could hear the screams and whispers, luring her to death, with the core emotion being that she had no one but herself against the world. Why struggle against pain if no one cares for your existence? If your death won't hurt anyone, and if you will forever remain alone until your death, what difference would it make to prolong it? She said, lying her back on the clouds as she looked into the sky. I can hear that voice ringing in my head after the injury. I could have healed myself by sucking blood from anyone around, like you said, but that would only prove the words right. Why should I prolong death if the result will be the same anyway? I am too much of a monster to ever be cared for or loved. So, why struggle so much? She said, more to herself than anyone else. So I didn't try to avoid death and simply retreated to my place. But, before I could fully shut my eyes, I had one image in my head that refused to leave. Anytime I almost completely gave up, the image appeared, and my eyes snapped open and her hand suddenly reached out, dragging him down so he fell onto his back. Hey, what are? He quieted down when he felt her hold his face as she turned it to her. It was the image of you, Odette whispered, a pink blush dusting her cheeks. So, to finally have a reason to give up and not fight death anymore, I decided to send a text. And when I did, I could finally let go. Truth was, I wasn't really hoping you would be the one to end it, nor did it ever cross my mind that you would actually help. I just needed a reason to finally give up. But who would have thought you would be so stupid, not just showing up, but even saving my life? At this point, she laughed out loud, but Ryuk didn't know what to think of it as he watched a line of tears slide down from her eyes, crossing her nose bridge before continuing downward. If you had killed me, it would have only reminded me of a truth I already know. To never show mercy, or give a chance to someone who was once an enemy. It was a truth even Ryuk couldn't refute, having lived his own side of it in a past incident. But now that you came and I'm only witnessing this particular moment because of you, I don't know what that's supposed to teach me or mean, she said, releasing her grip and turning back to the sky. He looked silently at the side of her face for a while before also turning his gaze upward. Hey, Ryuk, she suddenly called out, making him turn to her. Would you believe me if I say that? She paused, falling silent. Say what? He asked as she turned to him. Her lips moved, but no words came out. She waited for a few seconds, then finally said, I need some blood. Can I have some? She asked, watching the mocking flicker in Ryuk's eyes. Wow, someone finally decided to be nice and actually ask? He teased, watching the veins pulse on her temple once more. Can you just shut up and actually say yes? She snapped. No, you may not, he said, but in the next moment he was falling through the sky once more. Just before him was her face, her lips parting to reveal the fangs poking out. Now that's the Odette I know. If you're just gonna do it, why even ask? He said with an eye roll, watching her giggle as her hands wrapped around him, her lips leaning closer to his neck. The sound of sucking could be heard, lasting exactly 10 seconds before Odette parted her lips. Foolish. If you deny me your blood, it only makes me want it even more, she said, smiling while wiping the blood from her lips. So far, it's just the blood. I guess I don't mind sharing, Ryuk said with a shrug. But instead of releasing him after she had her fill, she pulled him closer as they descended down the ground where a water body was waiting below. Her lips brushed closer, and she whispered, The blood is sweet, but that just makes me wonder, how much sweeter would it be if what I had was the whole of you instead? She said, and Ryuk swallowed. Don't tell me you're planning to eat me up next, he muttered, hearing her giggle coquettishly before whispering, I guess that's one way to put it. Go away. They both disappeared into the water, which rippled intensely from the collision. Its surface burst open once more as a head broke through, inhaling deeply. Air filled Ryuk's lungs again, and he turned his head to find her surfacing as well. All one, someone's face turned ruby red? She teased. Ryuk dipped back into the water, leading her to giggling in mockery at him. But then, he felt a reverberation from his Amacoms and brought out the golden panel, only to find a message that froze his breath within his lungs. She's awake? Morgaine, he thought. But then, the words rang out from the side. Who's Morgaine? In the end, you were the one who lost. In a void of space dotted with golden particles, a single throne stood at the center. Right now, it was empty, with a figure having slid off to its foot, while another stood before the one on the ground. Surprisingly, the two figures looked identical in both shape and appearance. Both resembled a single person, Morgaine, but even at that, it wasn't difficult to tell who was who. The Morgaine who had slipped from the throne had both hands, now golden claws, clutching at her head. Her body spasmed from shock, her teeth tightly gritted. You're nothing. The words echoed endlessly in her mind, making her clench her jaw harder. He was someone she had always looked down on. From the very first moment she had learned his name, she had despised him. For one with a bloodline as pure as Morgaine's, a man like that could never have deserved her. He had thought him a leech, someone using Morgaine's status as a leech to better himself. And when she finally decided to face him, to put him in his place and remind him that he was undeserving, she had been brutally defeated. She had learned he was younger. Yet, even after fully maximizing Morgaine's cultivation potential, she was still crushed. The truth of that led him to another truth which she refused to accept. I'll fight him. Once more, she said, crawling to her knees, trying to sit on the throne, only for it to burst out a golden light that flung her away from it. She was barely caught by Morgaine, who said to her, Have you forgotten that the throne only accepts the strongest? You're too weak now and undeserving of it, she reminded, releasing her hold on her, before stepping toward the throne. but the hem of her golden gown was grabbed, forcing her to turn her head. I lost because of your weak vessel. If I had my real body, I would have won. Morgaine yanked her gown free and continued forward, finally taking her seat on the throne. The second she did, golden motes of light dispersed from the throne, diffusing into her. She exhaled deeply. Finally, the elders had once claimed that the Morgaine before her existed only as an echo, there to guide her, to maximize her cultivation speed. It seemed true at first until things quickly turned awry. The stronger the other Morgaine grew, the pickier the throne became. No matter how many times she tried to reclaim it, she was always rejected, thrown off mercilessly. That had kept her away from her own body, leaving her passive, only able to watch what the other did with what was hers. But now she could finally take control once more. Even if you lost because my body was weak, she said calmly, you have to admit he has more potential for growth than either of our bodies could ever achieve. TCH. You only hated him because, unlike us, he isn't well known, and doesn't wear a crown of potential over his head. If he were one of the true angelic princes or princesses of the royal houses, you'd have no issue with his presence, she muttered, her expression unchanged. She had long observed this echo of hers and now understood its thoughts and actions. It wasn't men that she hated, as she had once believed. It was the weak she despised. And now, even though Ryuk had defeated her, she still hated him. The reason was simple. All her life, this and the previous, she had been placed on a high pedestal due to her potential. She had most of the world's respect and pleased eyes due to an overglorified number percentage. Now meeting with Ryuk, who looked ordinary, yet plausibly more talented than her, she refuses to believe. Morgaine didn't try to comfort her at all. No. She deserved this much pain after purposely keeping her away from what was rightfully hers. Her body began to integrate better into the throne, her head dropping as her eyes closed. Runic lines burned across her skin, the phantom of a body appearing in the space behind the throne. Golden chains streaked with runes bound her to the phantom. TCH. I will grow stronger and put him in his place soon, the other Morgaine said, crossing her legs as she began channeling energy within the soul space to heal her injured self. Silence reigned for a long while, but slowly, Morgaine felt familiar sensations return. Sound came first, the gentle breathing of someone. Then came touch, hands on her arms. Her fingers twitched as she regained control, and soon she could move her eyelids, slowly forcing them open. Her eyes adapted quickly, revealing a man pausing mid-step, staring at her, lips opening and closing in shock. "Father," she whispered, enough to wake the one sleeping close to her. "Morgaine," Mrs. Linnea called out, her brows furrowing with both relief and suspicion. How could they be sure she was the one? "Mom, can you get your hands off me already?" Morgaine said. The words instantly brought tears to Mrs. Linnea's eyes as she leapt onto her daughter's chest. "It's really you." Those harsh words. They were the same ones she had always received from her when she was the half-fallen, only changing after Ryuk's arrival. There was no other proof needed. You made me so worried," she wept with joy. Their embrace lasted nearly a minute, only growing tighter, until finally Mrs. Linnea pulled away. But not without the sharp sound of a slap rang through the room as Morgaine held her burning cheek. "Mom!" she screamed, watching Mrs. Linnea scoff as she sat back down, regaining her dignified aura. "You deserve it," she said unapologetically, closing her eyes. But when she opened them again, Morgaine was no longer on the bed. She turned her head and found her in her husband's arms, hugging him tightly. "I'm just glad you're okay." The day was already upon them before they knew it, and old Jack departed for his service. Morgaine was quickly caught up by her mother about their departure and the reason for it. It was something she was already a bit aware of, and their fears of wanting to leave weren't unreasonable. As the chosen, she was well aware of the Dominaire family's acts and knew the way they could retaliate. Truly, leaving for an angelic royal house like the Nobita was really the best move. After she had been caught up on things, she tried to move a little, but pain racked her entire body, eventually forcing her to succumb to her bed once more. She wasn't injured anymore, as that had already been taken care of by the high-grade healing serum Ryuk had given her. But there remained a crippling soreness that hadn't completely healed yet. Eventually, Mrs. Linnea had to head out to get some of the things they needed. They had moved in quickly the night before, and now she could finally complete all the other important errands. It left Morgane alone in her room, silently gazing out the window, the streaks of sunlight partly illuminating her face. I wonder how he feels now. The thought echoed in her mind as her eyes grew distant. Suddenly, the rays of sunlight illuminating her face seemed to dim, and strands of air tussled around her. Her brows creased faintly when she noticed the window had been opened more than she remembered. The breeze here must be quite strong, she thought silently. But then, she caught a smell in the room. A smell that filled her with familiarity and nostalgia. She sat up, resting against the headboard, while her gaze drifted from the window to the room itself. She didn't have to search long. Immediately, she noticed the figure sitting on the chair at her left side, both hands on his cheeks as he blinked twice at her. "You're up." His voice carried relief, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Unconsciously, a line of tears slid down her cheeks as her fingers clenched the sheets covering her. I'm sore." She had yet to complete the words when a hand gently caught her jaw, lifting her face. All she saw in her line of sight were those rosy red lips. Before she knew it, her apology was halted, replaced by a soul-deep kiss that sent her into a trance. It seemed like nothing more than a kiss to the outside world, but to both it was communication. From their lips touching, she could feel his yearnings, a mix of sadness from her absence and love from the value he placed on her. From her he could feel guilt and pain, mixed with fear. She was sad for making him suffer through all those troubles, and the thought of it set her heart aching. With it came the fear of him hating her, fear of him leaving. Their lips parted after they both understood. She held his hands closer to her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, golden crystal tears falling, though they reached no further than the finger that gently wiped them away. "I understand," he replied. Suddenly, she jumped into his chest, hugging him tightly. His warmth, his scent, the overwhelming feeling of nostalgia. All of it was something she would gladly drown in for eternity. How foolish of her to leave all of this in the pursuit of power. His hug felt 100 times better than breaking through a cultivation stage. His soft words reached the deepest part of her, a place fallen energy could never touch, no matter how much it thrummed in her blood. Power was ephemeral, with just one unfortunate incident being capable of stripping her of it, and even her life, but what existed in this world that could strip away his love for her, or erase her from his memories? Would she only ever realize this when she finally loses him? "I am so foolish," she whispered to herself, but being so close, it went straight into his ears. That might actually be true," he whispered back. A giggle escaped her lips, the swirling cloud of negativity fading away. "You dickhead," she cursed, but even that only gave him the familiarity. How much he had missed even her curses. "Well, that was fast," he said seriously this time. Her face showed shock before dropping into dejection once more. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "No, idiot. I'm just messing with you. Ha ha ha. You dickhead," she screamed, pouncing on him like a wild beast. But her body winced in pain when his hand faintly brushed her back. Even though it lasted less than a second, he noticed and asked, "Does it hurt?" "No," she lied, and he knew. "Don't worry about it. I'll grow another pair of wings in no time. As a halo is to an angel, so are wings to a fallen." They held the runes of their power, their control over fallen energy. Having them ripped off and discarded equated to being half-crippled, and it naturally brought with it pain. New wings eventually grew back, given enough time, but that can never stop the lingering agony, the body's constant reminder of having lost the last ones. He sat up in the bed with her seated on him and asked, "Can I see it?" "I don't want you to feel guilty about it," she replied softly, shaking her head. "Do you want me to take your clothes off then?" He teased with a mischievous grin, watching her face turn red like a tomato. But then, she raised both hands, waiting for him. Now it was Ryuk's turn to blush, covering his face with both hands. The sight made her burst into laughter, taunting him. "And I thought you'd grown a bit bolder." But she spared him further embarrassment, turning her back to him instead and slipping off her clothes. Now Ryuk could see the gaping wounds. He hated to say it, but the wounds looked really bad. When he had fought with her other, he had been caught up in the heat of the battle, roughly pulling them out. Only now could he wonder just how much pain that must have caused. But thankfully, a bright flicker of light shone throughout the room as Ryuk reached into a sudden rift that appeared right by his side, pulling out a total of 4 brightly burning golden wings. "You? How?" she asked, surprised. She had thought he had thrown the wings away, yet here they were in his grasp. "I hope it's not too late to have it rejoined," he said, bringing out one of the wings and placing its end onto the scar where it had previously been. When he did, golden light bloomed at both ends, and he watched as the wing joined back with a golden bone whose source was her spine. They integrated, and he watched as wing unfurled into her back. When it did, Ryuk noticed the gaping wound also closing up, leaving just a slit whose surface was soon covered by new golden sigils. Morgaine visibly exhaled in relief. The sensation was like entering a moderately cold bath, totally drowning out her pain for a moment. "Seems like it worked," Ryuk said, moving up to the second wing. But while he did so, his ears twitched as the door to the room opened. Stepping in was none other than Mrs. Linnea, who blinked twice when she saw Morgaine, half naked, with Ryuk behind her, holding a large wing to her back while 2 more lay on the bed. "Mom!" she called out, her face turning bright pink. The same was true for Ryuk, causing a giggle to escape Mrs. Linnea's lips. "Seems like the 2 lovebirds are a little busy. I'll check in some other time," she said, winking at Morgaine, who rolled her eyes. When she left, Ryuk continued fixing up the wings, and he finished a few minutes later. But then, something happened after he fixed all 4 wings. The new runic tattoos on her back spread down below to her waist, and right before his eyes, he watched as 2 new slits appeared under the 4 upper ones. And then, it was like the sun of a new dawn, rising higher and higher until it began gently burning over. 2 more new wings opened up behind Morgaine, and automatically, all 4 of her previous wings also unfurled, rising higher and higher into the air. Morgaine's eyes fell closed as she slowly rose into the air with 6 giant golden wings that illuminated the room in full radiance. It was so bright that even Mrs. Linnea noticed. She paused, opening the door only to find her daughter floating unconscious in the air. 6 wings? She thought to herself in surprise. But that wasn't the end. From above Morgaine's head, something began manifesting. A halo. It was something solely unique to the angels, but hers was also different from theirs, for it burned not with golden light, but with dark flames instead. And right at its center, a golden triangular prism had formed. The changes were not limited to just the room. Up in the sky, over the Nobita royal houses, a gigantic circular halo appeared. Soon enough, several angelic presences with powerful auras appeared in the air, their gazes settling onto the house where the lights of the halo gathered. Their eyes filtered through the walls, and naturally, they came to sight Morgaine's figure, currently bathed in the golden radiance. "An angelic fallen awakening?" some murmured beneath their lips, brows creased. "That hasn't happened in up to 5 centuries. And to think it would happen in angelic territory. What sign is this?" The manifestation lasted only for a minute before disappearing. After it faded, the angels in the sky all moved to the building where Morgaine was, but all of a sudden, they all paused. Their Amma comes out, and on it was a message. Undersir. Do not interfere with fate lest you meet your ends. The almighty throne. The moment they saw the message and the one who sent it, They all faded from the sky one by one, returning to what they had been doing. When the bright halo that had swallowed her cleared up, Morgane's 6 wings retreated in. She silently fell from the sky but was caught by Ryuk, who laid her on the bed. Her eyelids shook and opened, but the second they did, Ryuk flashed away from the bedside, appearing farther off, his hands hanging inches away from his eyes, which were tightly shut. The rays of light were so biting that it felt like he had been stabbed in both eyes. What was even stranger was that Mrs. Linnea, who was by Morgane's side, remained absolutely fine. Even as the light illuminated her face, she only found it as gentle as the early morning rays of the sun. "Hey, Ryuk, are you okay?" she asked, worried, as he rose upright, his eyes opening once more. "I'm fine. Just got a little blinded is all," he said. And though his eyes were bloodshot, she watched as the red quickly began fading, the snow white returning. Morgane's eyes also stopped flaring with golden light, but looking into them, they had changed considerably. There was now the same dark flaming halo that floated above her head, also burning within her eyes. "What happened?" she muttered, confused and lightheaded, only to hear the words, "Congratulations on breaking through to the Apocrypha stage." "She's at the Apocrypha stage? That's abnormal." The system notification blinked right before Ryuk's, whose smile didn't change at all, but he knew it in his heart. The last time he had seen Morgane, she was at the Cataclysm stage. It had just been a little more than 2 months, and he came back to find her at the Eternity stage, which kind of made sense due to the presence of that other of hers that tried to maximize her potential. But now she had broken through to Apocrypha. That level of cultivation speed was jaw-dropping, but that shouldn't be called out by someone like him. Morgane herself found it hard to believe she had broken through. She clenched her fingers, and instead of feeling power, she felt nothing, yet also something. Something terrifying with every clench. "Breakthrough or not," Mrs. Linnea said, grabbing her wrist before pulling her off the bed. "Now that you're fine, I'll be needing your help in the kitchen." She spoke in an unimpressed tone, dragging Morgane out of bed. She tried to protest, but soon their voices drowned out in the background. The door shut, and Ryuk's smile lingered until he sat at the edge of the bed, his grin fading into a long exhale of relief. "Good thing she's awake, huh?" The system panel bubbled into view, and Ryuk couldn't help but agree. From having his girlfriend's mind replaced by another entity, to getting into a fight that still damaged her body, to her regaining consciousness and even growing stronger from the ordeal, that was the best-case scenario he could have ever hoped for. "A pity you'll be leaving them soon. You know, you really have Ryuk to thank for being in good condition," Mrs. Linnea said later at the table. "He had to sneak into the Dominaire main grounds, get a hold of something important while avoiding being seen, and still ended up in trouble with the elders. Perhaps we should have been more careful about placing trust in the Dominaire family," Mrs. Linnea added, addressing Morgane, who sat across from her. Beside her, though, sat Ryuk, eating quietly. When Ryuk heard Mrs. Linnea's words, his brows creased. She didn't know yet. Morgane had chosen to fuse her consciousness with another being of her own will, and it hadn't been misplaced trust in the Dominaire. Still, he kept silent, not correcting her. "Make sure to thank him properly, okay?" Mrs. Linnea pressed, and both paused when Morgane's cheeks flushed pink once more. Someone's blushing so hard. I wonder why," Mrs. Linnea teased. "Moom, stop it," Morgane groaned, shifting uncomfortably. "Tee-hee." Her mother teased even further. "What plans do you have now, anyway?" Ryuk asked, changing the subject. "Now that you're definitely not going back to the Dominaire family as their chosen, what do you plan to do?" Morgane hummed softly, her brows creasing as she thought. Truthfully, she hadn't had the time to think about that yet. "I'm not sure, really. I guess I'll just stay home, getting fattened up by Mom," she replied with a faint smile, watching Mrs. Linnea roll her eyes. "And you?" she asked, turning the question back on Ryuk. Her curiosity piqued Mrs. Linnea's interest, too. Ever since Ryuk returned from his mission, he hadn't spent much time at home. She assumed he had been preparing for infiltration, as when he finally came back, he had returned with Morgaine. Now that Morgaine was safe, she was, of course, hoping he would also have less to do and maybe get to witness some young, budding love moments between the two. You know how some creatures change over time? Ryuk began. Both Morgaine and Mrs. Linnea frowned slightly. What do you mean? Morgaine asked. I mean like hydras, for example. When they retreat into slumber and come out as dragons. Like when they evolve? Morgaine asked, and Ryuk nodded. Exactly. I'm close to my evolution, so... He trailed off as Morgaine's cheeks puffed with suppressed laughter. What are you, some evolving snake? She teased. But Mrs. Linnea cut in. You don't know he's a dragon? Morgaine blinked twice in confusion, which left Mrs. Linnea staring at her with raised brows. She turned to Ryuk, who quickly whispered, We don't really get that much time to discuss things like that. He defended. Mrs. Linnea's gaze snapped back to Morgaine, suspicion written across her face. What did I do? Morgaine muttered nervously. If I weren't more aware, I'd think you were friend-zoning him, Mrs. Linnea said flatly. The least you could do is know your boyfriend's race. How can you be so clueless as to never even ask? Morgaine had no response to that. But truthfully, it was because she knew whatever he said he was, she would be fine with it. That was probably why it had never occurred to her to ask. So, about your evolution, Mrs. Linnea redirected to his original topic. How long will it take? Ryuk shook his head. It's hard to say. Could be 3 days. Or some 6 months. 6 months? Are you kidding? Morgaine's voice cracked as she froze. She had only just reunited with him after nearly 2 months of being trapped inside her soul space. And now he might leave again for half a year? I said I'm not sure. It could be just 3 days too. Ryuk replied, but his reply wasn't really consoling. As much as I also think half a year of absence is hard to bear, especially now when the family has just reunited, I also understand that evolving into your fullest potential isn't something that should be questioned, Mrs. Linnea said. As a family, the least we can do is not hinder your progress. So, 6 months or a year, it'll be fine. She said it to Ryuk, but mostly for Morgaine, who looked on the verge of bursting, but held it back at her mother's words. Breakfast continued with less serious conversation until its eventual peaceful end. Ryuk soon made his way to the top of the mansion to take in some breath of air, but it hadn't been a couple of minutes when he heard footsteps behind him. It hadn't even been a couple of minutes when he heard footsteps. Turning properly, he saw her images suddenly split into two. A Morgaine whose head bubbled up in the stairway up, and another Morgaine right in his arms. That's fast, he said, watching the image of Morgaine behind him fade after 3 seconds. He turned down only for her to lean forward, her lips gently touching in a soft kiss that lasted for quite a long while. When it broke, she asked, Hey, Ryuk. Are you mad at me? She suddenly asked, looking into his eyes. I'm not at all, he responded seriously, and that did help take away the doubt in her eyes. Did I do anything to make you feel that way? He asked, watching as she nodded. Yes, I thought you wanted some space from me, she said, looking down, only for her face to be drawn back to him. I'm not, he said, and she smiled sweetly. Her hands reached for his face as she gave him a long kiss so melting that her hands slid off his face and trailed down to his neck, only for her fingers to brush against what seemed like a bump on his skin. She pulled back gently from the kiss, her eyes moving to his neck, and there she found something that made her eyebrows furrow. Your neck. Is this a bite mark? She asked, her brows creasing as her fingers brushed against it. They were 2 dots, currently sealed but never fully healed, and unconsciously, the sight of them made her heart beat faster and faster, a reason she couldn't explain. They are, Ryuk responded, and she followed up. They seem fresh. Where did you get them from? She said, looking into his eyes, and he studied her expression before leaning closer to her ear, whispering, A woman. The second those words were mentioned, They both could hear the sound of a heartbeat skyrocketing uncontrollably, and it was hers. Morgaine's eyes widened in shock, her knees turning weak, but just as they quivered, she was picked up by him, having her sit on his lap. I don't think that's true, she said, and he nodded slowly. But it is. Stop it. Stop tormenting me, she screamed out, finally losing it, only for laughter to ring through the air as Ryuk couldn't hold it back any longer and burst out laughing. Morgaine's face had turned steamy red, not from anger or embarrassment but from pure jealousy, with her body quivering beyond her control. You know, I have to agree that you look even cuter when jealous, he said evilly, as she scoffed, folding both arms together. Shut up, dickhead, she muttered. But now, there was a mountain in her heart that refused to leave, prompting her to ask, "Tell me the truth. How did you get the bite mark?" she asked seriously and worriedly. "It's a long story," he said, shooing it off with a shrug. "Will it take 3 years to fully narrate?" she asked as he blinked twice. "Huh. Even if it takes up to 3 years to narrate, I still want to hear it." Noticing the focused glare in her eyes, he could see this wasn't a topic he could just shoo off, and in the end, he could only quickly summarize everything. How he had taken the mission from Officer Reese, the team, his adventure with Orlith, and how they had eventually come in contact with Odette. How she had eventually let him leave, and up until their time together yesterday. He left out nothing important, nor did he keep any secret about it. All Morgaine did was look into his eyes, even after he finished the explanation. "What did you see her as?" she asked him, watching him squint his brows, but then he replied, "She's strong. The strongest person I have ever known up until now. I did almost everything I could in the fight, yet still lost, and deep in my heart, I know if I had tried everything, I would have still failed to defeat her. What's more, she doesn't even seem to be trying that hard," he said, watching Morgaine's brow crease. "Are you mad that my undefeatable image got broken?" he teased, and she shook her head. "No, I'm not. In one way or another, there is always someone out there who is better, perhaps just less known." "I knew when you just started cultivating, back in the Fallen Genius arising on Endearth, and there was a time I could defeat you with a serious punch, you know. But now, I don't even know how strong you really are, or what your true cultivation level is. Knowing well I'm not the best when it comes to cultivation potential is what I have learned from being around you, so I know there's no true invincibility," she said, something that quite surprised him. He had expected her to tease him for his loss or be dumbfounded at it, but she had agreed to it, 100 times better than him admitting it. "I think this woman Odette," she said, suddenly sitting upright around his waist. Her 2 other legs floated in the air behind him, her body pressing softly against his. Ryuk hummed, and she continued. "I think you admire her?" Morgaine said, watching Ryuk raise an eyebrow. "Really?" he said with an eyebrow raised, but then his jaw was held by Morgaine as she gave him a focused stare. "I'm not joking. Why do you think that?" "The way you described it," Morgaine responded, continuing. "Up until now, I think every fight you have given your all to, you always manage to win, in one way or another. It might have created this invincibility belief of yours. Not the arrogant, dumb, invincible feeling of those heavenly genius, but more like a feeling of, if I fight as hard as I can, and give it everything, I won't lose," she said, a notion Ryuk really couldn't argue against. That belief was similar to the one he had of fate. But your fight with her, when you gave everything and still ended up losing, and knowing well she didn't even seem to be trying her best at all. As much as you don't think it's true, I think you've since held her up in awe. You're amazed by her strength, up until the point where you didn't even try to deny her at all when she requested your blood. And you being so headstrong about defeating her in a fair fight, perhaps only then would you feel you're enough. Maybe only then will you be able to tell her no. Your relationship after the fight started like that of a defeated captive, bound to every will of their winner. Even after the dynamics of the relationship changed, and you got to do what you want without her having much hold on your life, still, your belief of being a captive didn't change. And your mentality is still, one day, when I'm strong enough and defeat her fair and square, then I can tell her no. He found it hard to refute Morgaine's words. His initial excuse for allowing Odette to prey on his blood without resisting had been that her doing so would create the abyssal energy grimoire. But even after that had been completed, he still hadn't really resisted her last night when she sank her fangs into his neck. It left him asking, what other excuse did he have now? Now that he had gotten all he needed from her bites, why did he still allow it? Was he some psychopath who secretly enjoyed having his blood siphoned off? It sounded ridiculous, but until now, that was the only explanation he could think of. Morgaine's answer was different. It was because he admired her. The system had asked him to finish her off while she was unconscious, but he had refused, headstrong about defeating her fair and square. Why would he care about defeating an enemy fairly or not? He had never been a righteous person growing up and knew well he would never be a hero. So then why hadn't he just killed her at her weakest and ended the chapter once and for all? It might have been unfair, but that's just how the world works. When she suggested his mentality toward Odette might be that of a captive, it sounded more reasonable than his previous psychotheory or his fearing he was becoming too righteous and abandoning logic for morality. That last idea sounded dumb even to him. I don't know. I've never really sat down to give it that much thought, he admitted, and Morgaine giggled. Yes, that's the one thing you suck at after all. You think I suck at analyzing myself? He asked, and she nodded. Not just yourself, situations and events in general. You suck at really getting into an in-depth analysis of them. She could tell he didn't fully believe it, prompting her to ask, You think Odette is powerful, right? He nodded. Then what do you think she thinks of you? If you were truly the type to study events deeply, that shouldn't be hard. Ryuk was silent. What did Odette think of him? If he had an opinion on her, what was hers of him? He had never considered that before. I might really suck at analyzing situations in depth, he eventually admitted. Morgaine chuckled and rested her head on his chest, her fingers brushing the bite marks on his neck. Silence continued for a while. The only sound was the breeze that tossed their hair. Then Morgaine whispered, Hey, Ryuk. Have you ever loved someone other than me? She asked softly. Ryuk paused. Images flashed in his eyes. He stayed quiet for a long beat before responding. I may have, but not in the way I love you. Is it a list or just a name? She pressed with a slight giggle. A list? He repeated, then frowned. Wait, are you trying to know if you were the only one chosen among a million? That's kind of sadistic, you know? He teased, and Morgaine giggled, clearly enjoying it. No, she said, more serious now. I'm just curious. Ryuk hummed, studying the golden-haired woman in his arms before letting go of the suspicion. I don't have a list. All the girl names I know wouldn't fill the first page of a book, let alone the ones I love among them, he said. Morgaine couldn't hold back a smile, though she hid it against his chest. So, it's just a name? She asked. He nodded. Tell me more, she urged. I'm not sure you'll be fine with that, he replied. But she lifted her head and pressed a hand to his beating heart. Things like that make a heartbeat deeper, she said. Things so deep you'd likely keep them personal until death. Why would I refuse the deepest part of my beloved just because it could probably bother me later? She asked innocently. He studied her for a long moment as she settled back into his embrace. Finally, he said, Her name is Astralaxia, the path of stars, Morgaine whispered, and Ryuk's brow creased. That's the meaning of her name. And when did the brutish Morgaine become a scholar? He teased. She giggled. Did you both ever admit your love for each other? She asked. Ryuk hesitated. Love for each other? No, I don't think it went like that, she confessed though, he said. Don't tell me you rejected her? She asked, fingers pausing. Ryuk shook his head. No. She left a letter when she went searching for her homeworld. She confessed in that letter. Perhaps she might have tried to be more wordy about it, but it didn't happen like that, he said, ruffling her golden hair. Ever wished she had worded it to you? Wished she said that, "I love you, Ryuk?" Morgaine asked. She did it in a way that was 100 times better than that, Ryuk whispered. His words caused her to pause. Even though they were a whisper, they roared deep in her soul, leaving her stunned. How so? She asked softly. She was just there, you know, Ryuk replied, his memories drifting back to his time with Astralaxia. She was there when the half-fallen one had a bounty on my head, and not even the only person I trusted, Mad White, could have kept me safe. She was there when I was confused, lost about the state of the love I had for you, and wondering about the fate of it. It hits harder because she could have chosen not to be, Ryuk said, and Morgaine smiled softly before whispering, I want to know more. Please. I told her once that we're stuck in this, having gotten her entrapped in my plans, and when I decided to go face my problems alone, she said, we're stuck in this together, remember? Even after we went down that ruin, and I took almost more than a year to come back, when I finally did, I found her working on the goals we'd set together. You know, Morgaine, people can choose to love or be kind to you, but that's so far you're alive, right? If you're dead, they'll move on, and that world feels that's okay. But Aster? She didn't just stick when I needed her the most. She still stuck with the plans, even when the whole world and she believed I was dead. So did she really word her confession to me? He asked, the question hanging between them. She did, Morgaine whispered, with not the slightest doubt. By his words, she didn't just say, I love you. She showed it with her actions, and a single good action was worth more than 100 promises or declarations. How could something that powerful not work out? She asked, perplexed and hopeful, because it didn't seem like that at first. The truth was we had a deal in place. She helps me save Endearth, and I give her freedom. Have her regain her freedom? Was she a captive of yours? Morgaine asked suspiciously, and he shook his head. She was powerful, dangerous even, but locked up. The deal was the only way I could bring her out while also keeping Endearth and myself safe. So all she did at first, one could say, was just her keeping her end of the deal to get what she wanted, right? Morgaine hummed softly before asking again, did you ever regret it? Did you ever wish she had stayed enough for you to say yes to the letter? Or like regret of not being with her in the end? Ryuk shook his head. No, I don't regret not being with her in the end. You don't? She asked, almost in disbelief. I don't really, Ryuk said with a shrug. She watched his normal goofy mood return, though he still replied seriously. The relationship started as a simple deal. You're there for me, and in return, I'll get what you want the most. She stuck through her words, and naturally, I stuck through mine, dispersing the contract at the end of everything, and she went on her path. One could say it was a business deal with a little bit of harmless spice. It could have budded into something more, but that doesn't mean I regretted that it didn't. In the end, if I have to choose between the relationship having grown into something more, compared to all I am and all I have now, he said as she felt his hold around her gently tighten, then I would still choose this current life of mine without a second thought. The unconscious action of his made her smile sweetly, and she forced out the whisper, so in the end, you still chose me? No, he said, pulling her closer, while his cheeks rested on her head. You were never a choice to begin with, he responded, as she silently sniffled, buried her face into his chest. For a second, Morgaine felt herself lesser. Nothing more than a second choice because the first never worked out. Nothing more than a second choice because the first never worked out. But how could she not feel that way? Compared to Aster, how had she ever proven to him she loved him? All she ever did was be a headache. Get in trouble. Force him to risk his life coming to save her. And in his darkest moment, when he needed help the most. Where was she? By his side? No. She was there, holed up in her royal castle, doing nothing but hoping. It was one of her scariest nightmares. of not being worthy enough to stand by his side, and one day being replaced. But his words of always choosing to stick with her, never seeing her as a choice to be taken or dropped, brought her to tears. A warmth radiated through her, stronger than anything she had ever felt. But she was pulled out of it when he said, "Don't get too comfy with that, though." "Huh," she said, turning to Ryuk, and watched him reply with a smug smile. She left her contact number on the letter too, so she's just a call away. He said it with a happy grin that made a vein appear on her temple. "A girl's number on your device? You dickhead!" she shouted, as he burst out into loud, mocking laughter. "I know you're one jealous thing," he teased, watching her pout with a loud humph. A thought crossed Ryuk's mind, reminding him of something, and his brows furrowed a bit, something Morgaine noticed. "What's wrong?" "I've just been thinking about that other consciousness of yours," he said. "The Grand Elder told me it only happened because you specially allowed it. I've been wondering how true that is." "He's right, and it wasn't supposed to go that awry," she responded. "No one could have imagined the throne of consciousness in me would reject the less stronger consciousness and refuse me control over my body. And since she had access to some of my memories, she was able to learn my behavioral patterns and deceive people into thinking I was the real person. Even the clan elders and the grand elders never knew the difference, and thought they were still speaking to me, with her only showing up during cultivation moments." "So, you not coming home?" he asked, and she nodded. "Yes, that wasn't me." She guessed that if she had come home to you guys, you would have easily noticed something was wrong. So she opted for a video call, Morgaine explained, and Ryuk hummed before remembering something. "Even with a video call, though, Mrs. Linnea was still able to tell," he replied. "She did. Yes, she told me. The one who called wasn't the Morgaine I knew, and it was what led me to appear in the Dominaire grounds in the first place. It was also how I instantly recognized you weren't the one," he said, and Morgaine hummed before smiling sweetly. "I guess I might need to show more love to that old hag," she whispered into Ryuk's ear, toward the end of her words. He chuckled, whispering back, "She's more beautiful than you, though." "Shut up," she shouted in anger. "It isn't a lie, though," he said, watching her huff. The truth was Morgaine was beautiful, incredibly so. But Mrs. Linnea? She wasn't just beautiful, she was charming. One who had recognized her beauty and perfected it with a fitting attitude and mannerism. Comparing Morgaine and her was like comparing a prodigious soldier who had yet to undergo training but had the potential to be a commander, versus a prodigious soldier who had already completed their training. She was everything but an old hag, like Morgaine claimed, and for now, she was winning that beauty contest. "About Odette, Ryuk?" Morgaine suddenly called, and he turned to her. "What about her?" The thoughts flickered through her mind. Her fist clenched softly for only a moment before she turned and smiled coquettishly at Ryuk. "Actually, never mind." "You sure?" he asked, pretty sure she had something to say, but she nodded. "Can I have your comm number instead?" she asked as Ryuk brought out his Amma comms and she quickly scanned it. "I can't promise always to be available, though," she shrugged, replying. "Just send a reply whenever you find the message." A satisfying beep sounded, and he watched as a new message profile appeared on his panel. None other than Morgaine. "Your evolution, when are you starting?" she said. "The earlier the better," he replied, and she slid off of him. "Then go while it still doesn't hurt to part from you. Don't take too long, Oki?" she said when Ryuk suddenly leaned into her. Her hands gently gripped his waist, pulling him into an embrace. Their eyes met for a moment. Pink blush rose on both their cheeks from the passionate stare before he leaned in, kissing her softly. "I'll be back soon," he said. In the next moment, he stepped back and his image faded into motes of purple light. A powerful breeze swept across the space, sending her gown and hair streaming backward. "I believe you." It didn't take up to 10 minutes before Ryuk was back at the bunker. He moved closer and was about to order the door opened when he suddenly stopped in place, like someone frozen in time. Extremely powerful, anomalous entities detected. In that instant, his neck jerked up into the sky, his gaze locking on a particular point. An ordinary person wouldn't have seen anything wrong, but Ryuk's hands moved to the side, and a gem appeared, white in color. His tattoos changed color to white, and then the image of a phantom lantern manifested. He spun the lantern in his hands before flinging it forward toward that point in space. Halfway there, the lantern phantom was blown into motes of light by an invisible ripple, but at the same time, it exploded, sending forth an arch of light that illuminated the area and shattered the illusion. At first, there was just a regular patch of sky. The next moment, a gigantic otherworldly object, a cross, stood where the sky had been. Just what is that? Ryuk thought, confused, studying the humongous cross whose surface was etched in runes that rippled with a familiar rainbow-like energy. It's a god ship, Ryuk spoke a moment later. Are you going to come out or not? The outer layer of the cross opened, and 3 beings stepped out, their sight making his brow crease. There were 2 males and a single female, all with shoulder-length rainbow-colored hair, their skin shimmering in the same rainbow hue. Their eyes were a kaleidoscope of color that gave Ryuk the illusion of staring into an endless abyss. The resemblance to Iris was uncanny. In a way, he had expected them. They walked on air to stand a few meters before him. The female pointed a finger at him, and words rang telepathically in his head. You have what is one of ours. He gave a silent In the next moment, he communicated telepathically with Zephyr. It had not even been 5 seconds when the glass-like surface of the sea beneath his feet suddenly parted. Iris immediately jumped out of the water, only to be grabbed by Ryuk as a coquettish giggle escaped her lips. She tried to sneak in a kiss when he caught her, but he dodged quickly. Still, she kept edging closer, offering a few more tries before he finally caught her jaw in his hold. I told you to stop sneaking in kisses. HMPF. She pouted, finally giving it up. Then Zephyr's voice echoed, shakily. And who are they? Iris's brow scrunched. She turned to look where Zephyr was pointing, eyes widening. Her small lips parted when she saw them, words escaping her. Zoe Mo Loren? It was a language Ryuk couldn't understand. As if in reply, the 3 individuals' eyebrows quivered repeatedly. He sensed an almost impossible ripple in the air flowing toward Iris, but in the next instant, his hand shifted into scaly white claws, and he slashed forward. Space slashed open, a chasm appearing and destroying the incoming ripples. Do you know these people, Iris? Ryuk sent telepathically, but then he noticed something abnormal. Iris was no longer in his arms. His eyes widened as he turned forward and saw something rippling gently toward him. A soft, feminine palm slowly crossing through space and reaching for his chest. His hands reached out to halt it in its path, but the panel suddenly blinked. Dodge! Immediately, Ryuk tried to shift, only to find himself moving with a slowness his mind couldn't register. In the least second, his motion to dodge changed to blocking, as he quickly crossed both arms together. Then, all of a sudden, the world blurred almost as if reality were a signal and he had been momentarily disconnected from it. The palm covered in rainbow light that had been heading for him. He didn't know what happened to it. Did it attack him? Was he able to dodge out of its range? Did he block it? All he felt upon waking was silence. The world stopped blurring. When Ryuk's eyes fully cleared, he found himself surrounded by a sea of purple, sleeping inside the seafloor. His lips parted and then, the sound of purple water mixing as blood burst from his lips. An excruciating, mind-numbing pain, a twist toward insanity, hit him like a fast-moving jet. He felt his own arms and realized a horror. The flesh was completely gone, reduced to crushed bones barely held together by tiny strands of a purple-white semi-solid object. The left side of his chest was gone, replaced with a gaping hole still bearing the imprint of a palm. Only now did he understand what had happened. He had tried to dodge as the system advised, but he realized he wouldn't be able to, due to the weird flow of time. In the end, he had crossed his arms, and when the palm landed, it had blown his flesh off and crushed his arms completely before smashing straight into his chest and ripping out from his back. The force of the attack was so powerful that it slammed him into the sea and blasted him deep into the sandy surface, about 50 kilometers deep in an instant. One palm, one strike, and it all ended. I can't move. The realization hit him, but it never stopped him. From beneath the water, Ryuk's gaze remained fixed on the sky where he had left them. Iris was in the hands of the rainbow-haired female, who slowly took back her outstretched palm. Her rainbow hair lit up in shimmering colors, and the same phenomenon occurred with Iris, her hair flaring brightly in response. The female lowered her eyes, meeting Ryuk's gaze through the sea. Her expression hardly shifted, but then she noticed his gaze slide away from her, toward Iris in her arms. It was as if Iris could feel his gaze too. She turned back, her eyes locking into his, but he noticed something had changed. For one, her eyes had become cold, almost aloof. Goodbye, the word echoed in Ryuk's mind. He could only watch as the female turned away, carrying Iris back into the ship, and they vanished inside. Now only the two males remained along with Zafri. Her mind still reeled, unable to keep up with what had just happened. But her reasoning snapped back when one of the males suddenly blurred forward, his hand reaching for her neck. Her eyes widened. She found herself trapped under a face so oppressive that it paralyzed her body, preventing her from getting out of the way. His hand was just about to close around her throat when, "Get back!" In an instant, she vanished, fading into thin air, and the rainbow-covered hand closed on nothing but her afterimage. The male narrowed his eyes, then shifted his gaze back toward the sea, where Zafri had reappeared beside Ryuk. A sneer twisted his lips before he pulled back his hand, turning toward the cross-starship and disappearing inside. The vessel sealed shut, then began to spin at tremendous speed. The sheer rotation tore space apart, forming a gigantic vortex. The ship slipped through, vanishing into the distortion before the space healed back to normal. The world's tempo resumed as though nothing had happened. Only two witnesses remained, Ryuk, still lying motionless, and Zafri, who could not comprehend how she had been saved, only that she had suddenly appeared beside him underwater. An old memory resurfaces in Ryuk's mind after the cross-shaped ship left with Iris. God races aren't like us. They don't think like us, nor do they follow our sense of reason. The same is true for the girl in your arms. When her family comes, they won't understand you, even if you can speak with them. They're like a tame beast that suddenly turns wild. No matter how well you once communicated with them, it all becomes meaningless once they enter that state. You should have gotten that girl out of your hands, like Odette warned. See what it caused in the end. The system panel blinked, but instead of regret, a faint smile tugged at Ryuk's lips. If I had thrown her out into the void, I would have been worried about what eventually became of her fate. Now, I at least know she's been safely reunited with her own. It was worth it. Ryuk! Ryuk! Are you okay? The voice sounded distant. He blinked and saw Zafri's hanging tentacles, eyes glassy as he looked at his broken state. It was the first time she had ever seen him like this. His skin was pale, ghostly white. His once mighty body shriveled as though all his blood had been drained. And worse, there was a hole in his chest, exposing the faintly beating organ inside. Hey, Zafri! His voice reached her telepathically as the world around him dimmed. Take me back to the lab. Don't worry, I'll get better. Tentacles wrapped around him instantly as Zafri sped back. Hey, system. Yes. Begin all possible evolution procedures once Zafri gets me in the lab. It was his final order before his consciousness completely slipped away. The moment Zafri reached the lab, she laid him down. Her expression was lost, as she didn't know what to do. There was no healing serum, and he had no healing ability. But then, a slit opened beneath Ryuk's neck, a second mouth, and the voice echoed in her ears. Leave the lab, Zafir. He will only grow stronger after this evolution. But you, on the other hand, will be blown to dust when the energy wave descends in 10 seconds. The voice, it was nothing like Ryuk's. Suddenly, a powerful aura burst out of him, like a dam breaking. The force of it was enough to send her skidding backward, her skin burning as though seared alive. Leave, now. The voice came again, and this time she had no doubt left. She rushed out, shutting the glass between the lab and the other room and activating its protective features. Cracks spread across the protective glass, golden flames erupting on its surface. What is this? Zafir whispered in shock as more flames blazed, devouring the lab faster than the glass could withstand. The realization struck her. It won't hold. She bolted for the elevator, fleeing upward. 3 seconds later, she burst into open water, swimming as fast as she could. Exactly 10 seconds after she escaped. Kaboom! The entire bunker detonated, a colossal explosion blasting upward in a towering mushroom of seawater. Waves of monstrous force surged outward, slamming against Zafir. She barely managed to control them, letting the currents hurl her further away until she crashed onto the shore of a nearby island. Gasping, she turned back. The mushroom cloud of energy still burned, golden light throbbing at its core. And from within, she could feel it clearly. A familiar aura. One that only grew stronger, stronger, and even stronger with every passing second. Her heart skipped a beat. It's him, Ryuk. He's growing more powerful. So this is his evolution. A melody. It pierced through the darkness that had swallowed me whole, and submerged my existence as the dark sea submerges ships that have lost the battle against its waves. Was it a finger I could first feel? Or was it the breeze brushing against my skin? I'm not sure. But nothing anchored me more than this sound I could still hear ringing so beautifully. I felt my fingers and the surface of my skin, and quickly the sensations returned to me. I felt like I was on my back, something gently whooshing around me, softly. The smell followed next, the tastefulness of which I had never felt. In a way, every breath seemed to draw the melody deeper into me, and the deeper I breathed, the more each breath allowed me to take in. I felt peace. So much peace, even though I feel like I have my eyelids under my control, I was somehow reluctant to open them. I wanted to be like this for eternity. But as I took my breath, and the melody grew louder, something in me became restless with a wish to know where this melody came from. What type of soul could be capable of such sound? What does it look like? Is it a male or a female? If I sit closer, would I be able to hear even clearly? Before I knew it, my eyes flew open, the sight of a cloudless blue sky welcoming me. I sat up to my butt, and I finally knew what was whooshing around me. They were roses. Their stalks were implanted into the ground while their blooms brushed around merrily. Nothing in the world could convince me that they weren't dancing to the melody, and even the breeze only aided them in it. I looked all around me, and everywhere I gazed was filled with these roses, everywhere my eyes could see. And in the air were tiny golden balls that all flew forward towards a place where the melody was coming from. It was the direction my feet were facing. I pushed off the ground with my hands and began walking forward. That simple action confirmed it for me. The more I moved forward, the more I could feel the melody growing. It was so soothing, so pure. I never knew when it happened. I started to run. How fast was I going? Mach 1? Mach 100? 700? But the world wasn't whooshing by, nor was the breeze chaotic. The only thing I knew was that the melody grew as I ran. Never for once distorted at all, only clearer. The balls hovering in the air seemed to be in the same race as I was, also moving forward towards wherever this heavenly melody could be playing from. They were like a guide of sorts. As the more I ran forward, the more they also congregated. I kept running, following the melody, reassured by the congregation, and I eventually came to find it. The silhouette of a tree with leaves of gold. I couldn't care that its height was about 3 times greater than mine, nor its mushroom-like shape, nor its special features like golden runes etched over its surface pulsing like a heartbeat. My eyes were on a figure sitting on one of its branches, legs swinging in the air. His body was facing the other side, and all I could see was his or her back, draped in a white garment, with his neck covered by flowing pink hair. But on his shoulder, there was a violin, tucked beneath the chin, its bow gliding across the strings. It was the source of the melody. By the devil, I have never felt this satisfied from having a conjecture of mine proven right. Now that I was closer, the melody indeed was a million times clearer and better. It seemed to pull me in, to whisper me a story of some sort that I could hear, growing clearer the further it played. I didn't move closer, but instead took a seat, and then fell onto my back once more, my eyes closing as I sank in deeper to these whispers. I saw a dream. There was a boy, his beauty bordering on that of femininity, with hair of pink, and a body frame that seemed to glisten with the air. He ran around a garden of roses and petals, and all around him were beasts, some small, some big, but if one thing was absolute, it was that in one way or the other, they were covered in scales. Draconic scales. Giggles and loud laughter left this boy's lips as he ran around these beasts who swoop in at him from every angle, like a hawk would swoop to catch its food. But neither their colossal maws nor their deadly sharp claws made even the slightest mark on the boy, never really coming in contact with his skin, no matter how close they seemed to come. The melody I knew was still ringing. That familiar melody, but in a way, why does it seem to have improved? It sounded twice as beautiful, twice as soothing, and as I looked around for its source, I found a familiar tree on which an unfamiliar woman sat. A woman in a gown of red, glowing hands of milky white, cradling a familiar violin that gave out this melody. Her eyes looked at the boy with motherly love. Somehow, as I looked into her pupils, all I could see was the image of the boy. Not even the draconic creatures that swooned all around him could be seen, nor the petals all around. In a way, it gave the illusion that only the boy truly existed, though my eyes still saw the truth. Is this the height of love? I found myself asking, where nothing in the world existed but that being loved. I could stay here for all eternity, watching a mother playing a beautiful melody while her son runs around a garden of roses and petals with joyous giggles and laughter. Oh, how peaceful this life was. But nothing beautiful ever lasts for long. Eventually, the swooning draconic beasts disappeared, one after the other, reduced to golden balls. The petals and roses on the ground also disappeared, leaving the land barren. And that beautiful woman faded away, too. The violin dropped to the ground, and the boy stopped running, bringing the giggles and laughter to a stop. He looked around him, like one who had lost his memories, moving forward to the only thing that was present, the violin. And he sat, right then and there, starting to play, with that smile appearing on his lips once more. He continued, silently, eternally. What was it called? The feeling of having grasped something, yet not being aware of anything. He had no words for it, but Ryuk knew he had grasped onto something. Eventually, he woke up from the dream, finding that the melody had stopped. At exactly what time it happened, he couldn't really tell. But when he woke up, back to that familiar garden of red roses, the first thing he did was look at the tree branch where that pink-haired figure previously sat. Alas, he had disappeared. The only thing left of him was the violin that had fallen onto the ground by Ryuk's feet, and the sight of it left his heart pounding hard. The place where the violin had fallen, the distance it had from its bow. It was exactly like the dream he had, when the violin dropped onto the ground from the woman's grasp. That same violin had dropped, and now, it was waiting for someone to pick it up, waiting for him? Is this the end purpose of the system? Ryuk muttered, standing to his feet. To find an heir to the violin. To continue the play, just like the past? The woman had played the violin and eventually dispersed, only for it to be picked up by the boy. And now, the boy had also dispersed, and here was Ryuk with the fallen violin just a few meters away from him. Unconsciously, he stepped forward towards the violin, bending to the ground, and he reached towards it with his right hand. But just a few inches from succeeding, His hands paused, having been gripped at the elbow by his left hand, forcing it to a halt. "No, no," he muttered out loud, withdrawing his hands as he took steps away from the violin. This isn't like the past. The past he was shown in the dream. There was a garden of two colors, red roses and blue lilies. But when Ryuk looked around him, there were only red roses. Not a single speck of blue lilies could be found. The past he was shown had various draconic creatures swooning around. But there was no draconic creature in this garden at all, only the golden orbs, which were their remnant spirit before they were all dispersed. The boy had taken after the mother's past, but he never recreated that same glory into the realm. His play didn't birth the blue lilies, and the creatures in the garden never returned. The past was repeated with the same play, but it was never complete. If he grabbed the violin now, no, he needed to understand why. Why did the dragons never return? Why did the blue lilies never grow? What was the boy missing? He had grasped onto something, but exactly what? With the understanding that something wasn't quite right, Ryuk's outstretched hand was returned, and instead, he turned to look at the hanging orbs of light. They all were still gathered around, now even in larger numbers, as if they were waiting for him to pick up the violin and restart the melody. The orbs were what was left after the draconic creatures faded. Is the orb their soul? Or their corpse? He gained an interest in these shining golden bulbs, and he moved out towards one of them. When he got closer, they didn't move back away from him, remaining in the same place, and Ryuk's hands moved out, grabbing one of them. Felt incredibly heavy, so he moved his other hand. With both hands wrapped around that orb, he brought it closer to look at it. It was heavy, too heavy. So he sat on the ground instead, and tried to look deeper into the orb. What he found was a realm within the orb. A realm where snow fell and the howling of cold storms brushed all around. In this realm of white, something caught his eye. The silhouette of a lone mountain right at the center of the realm. On top of this mountain there was a creature. A draconic creature covered in scales of white, with two gigantic wings piercing high above it. Its head raised in the motion of delivering a powerful roar to the sky. But it wasn't moving. It appeared frozen in this fiery state of it. A frost dragon. This ought to be Isha's last evolutionary state. Ryuk muttered to himself as he slowly took his gaze away from the orb, only for something to arrest his attention. He felt light flickering around him, and as he turned, his breath caught in surprise. In a small radius of about a meter where he sat, there were blooming blue lilies all around him, mixed in with the red roses. The blue lilies grew? He muttered, perplexed and at the same time confused. They were the blue lilies he remembered from the dream, but they bore a clear difference. The blue lilies in the dream had bloomed, their petals having spread, but these around his feet were yet to bloom. Was it by looking at an orb that the lilies return? He thought, looking at the orb in his hands. He rose back to his feet, putting the orb where he took it from, before his hands reached for another orb. He sat on the ground and looked into it. This time the scene was different. The realm was a single massive mountain, the ground around it cracked and filled with molten red. Looking into the mountain itself, it was bubbling with thick lava, and within was the submerged body of a pitch-red scaled dragon, the only thing revealed being its head, whose maws were wide open. A flame dragon. It held the same stance as the frost dragon, roaring furiously to the sky, while also stuck in its motion. Ryuk turned away from the orb, noticing another flicker of light, and that was when he saw that in an area of 3 meters, blue lilies had grown once more mixed in with red. He didn't immediately head to another orb, instead sitting down to rethink, and after a few hours passed by in silent contemplation, he exhaled deeply. I understand now. What does one do after reaching the peak of power with all their life goals completed? To Ryuk, it would be finally finding peace, retreating away from the world, away from the pain and everything around it, perhaps. With that as a reason, he could interpret what had happened in the dreams. The woman who first played the violin was surrounded by draconic creatures, who were all in their apex form. They reached thousands in pure numbers, and Ryuk could guess, in a way, they were her fused pets. It was almost ridiculous that a person could gather such a large number of beasts and have them all evolve to that level, and it kinda gave him a peek into what he guessed must have been the very peak of the system's capability. Such an amount of power must have been enough for one to complete their life goals, and this garden was definitely a peaceful place. She brought her son with her, along with her fused pets, while living out the rest of her time playing the violin and watching her son grow. Those times must have been the peak times. But when she faded, the dragons also faded with her. The boy picked up her violin and did the only thing he remembered brought him joy: playing the violin. But the dragons never came back, and even though the red roses grew, the blue lilies never did. That was because the boy never understood, nor tried to understand, the dragons, which were essentially an important part of the garden. It was their presence that made the blue lilies appear at all. They retreated with their master, but when he looked into the orbs, he found them roaring in rage. Why was that? Perhaps it was because the boy whom they swooned over all their lives, upon their disappearance, never for once looked upon their side. If he had just touched even one of the orbs, he would have brought back the blue lilies. But the fact that all Ryuk saw were red roses showed that he never for once did. All he did was all he could remember: playing the violin. Perhaps the boy's goal wasn't to recreate things or bring back the past like it was. It was to recreate that feeling of joy he had known while he was little, but in doing so, the dragons were ignored. Uncle Bob said he had found the system in some primordial runes. It was a bit defective, but he had fixed it up. Perhaps all the system had been in the beginning was a legacy, with the simple purpose of recreating the past of what had happened. Something that can't be done with just the violin, but also by being able to feel and resonate with the dragons. Who else could resonate with beasts than one blessed with the ability to contract them since little? It was the only way to bring back the dragon's souls and the blue lilies, to recreate the past. To have thought the system's main goal would have been so simple in the end. Ryuk muttered to himself, rising to his feet. He stepped forward towards the golden orbs and moved from one to another, each touch and look bringing back another area of blue lilies. There was no sense of time in here. Only purpose drove him forward, and eventually, he picked up the last ball, pressing it against his forehead before releasing it. He turned behind him, and a garden of red roses and blue lilies. But even more, looking at nearly thousands of draconic creature forms, his mind was bursting with so many draconic transformations and races that he could almost feel his head throbbing from the overload of information. But all of it was eye-opening, and right now, he knew exactly how Isha's final draconic form would be, same for that of Void and Zephyr. The orbs in here had a thing or another with every beast he knew previously. With the blue lilies having risen, mixed in with the red roses, it made things similar to the dream. But then, the golden orbs were still floating, and the blue lilies around had not yet bloomed. They only bloomed due to the dragon's presence. But the dragons have all faded away, with just their soul orbs remaining. I don't think there's more that can be done in here. His gaze unconsciously drifted to look at the fallen violin, the only thing he had not yet touched. Since he had done what could be done, he moved forward to the violin this time and picked it up. It was cold to the touch. Even for someone like him, who was aligned with frost, it was still cold. But then, he could hear the melody playing in his head just from gripping it. He didn't know how to play the violin, but still, he wanted to play it for himself. As he grabbed the bow and was about to strike the strings, a thought appeared in his head. Who am I playing for? Well, I'm only playing because I want to try recreating that play for the peaceful feeling it gave me, he said, his bow coming closer to the string, but then paused just an inch away as he turned to the floating golden balls around him. But the dragons, they were treated unfairly. Years of loyalty just to be forgotten, never once getting a look from the little one who they had played with and kept happy all their living existence. Their master only had the image of her son in her eyes, with neither the garden nor the dragons appearing within. This peaceful retreat was only peaceful to the woman and the boy, never the dragons. As a beast tamer, he could best feel this. Growing up, he had Isha and Void around him. They aided him in his battles and had shed blood for him. But if eventually he had a son or daughter, then naturally his child would mean the world to him. Still, how does that justify seeing nothing but the child, ignoring the beasts that had been there up until here? That would be so unfair to both Isha and Void. And so he grabbed the string with the thought, if playing the violin brings peace, then none here deserve it more than the dragons. Even though Ryuk had no idea how to play, he shut his eyes with the intent of playing for the dragons. The bow in his hands gently glided across the violin's strings, and as it did, a mystical pink aura flowed from its edges, winding around his arms. For a second, he lost cognitive ability. Was he playing it rightly? Did he glide properly upon the string? Was the bow tucked well beneath his chin? None of these thoughts ever occurred to him, yet he could feel the melody, not through his ears, but echoing directly into his soul. His thought faded completely, his heart slowing down to a crawl. That feeling of enthralling serenity came once more, lasting for longer than he could wrap his mind around before finally, a pink light flickered across the garden as Ryuk opened his eyes, its glow crossing through their depths. But then, he felt a weight pressing down on his legs. When he looked down, he found someone. It was a woman, so beautiful it felt like laying one's gaze upon a celestial pink. Pink runic tattoos marked the side of her face, fading down her neck and into the pink gown she wore, while her hair lay scattered across his legs and the flowers beneath. Her head rested on his folded legs, her hands lightly clenched. Her eyes stayed closed, calm like someone asleep, but then her pink lips moved. Ryuk! Her voice was a soft melody ringing through the garden. Is that it? Ryuk? She called out, her eyes fluttering open to look at him. Her eyes, they were pink in color, dusted in tiny dots of blue and red starlights. Her lips parted slightly, a smile appearing, as she whispered, I haven't heard such a melody in ages now, it said, as Ryuk opened and closed his lips, before muttering. It was my first time playing, though. The violin of Mechirasa is played with the soul. For a mortal, you have quite the noble soul, she said, as he scratched the back of his head awkwardly. She rose from his legs, sitting by his side. Now Ryuk could properly see her, and when he did, it finally occurred to him why he felt her so familiar. You're the woman in the dreams. She was the same one he had been shown in that dream. Alvarez showed you the past? How nice of him, she replied, seemingly surprised, and Ryuk was about to say something before he paused slightly, turning to look at the violin still held in his arms. I'm sorry. Oh? But why? The boy he dispersed. I'm sorry, he said, but was silenced when he felt the cold touch that gently held his chin, turning it to hers, and she whispered, We gods do not die, she said with a smile. Ryuk couldn't exactly say he understood what that meant, but if the woman who held so much love for the boy in the dreams could smile without worry, then there was no reason for him to be saddened by it. She relaxed her hold, rising to her feet, and only now could he see how long her hair was. It was so long, it covered the ground beneath her feet, spread over the sprawled ends of the gown. She took steps forward, pink runes glittering across the garden and spreading rapidly. He watched as the unopened blue lilies began to bloom, one after another, as the pink ripple of rune light swept through. She arrived before the golden balls, remnants of the draconic souls, her hands grasping upon one, and in an instant, it flared out with a bright golden light. Another ripple effect as the other balls also began flaring out in unison. I am Amori, a priestess from the lineage of Mechirasa, she began, her words resonating calmly through the garden. We are a god lineage blessed by the god Tool, the violin of Mechirasa, which you currently have in your hands, she said, giving a side eye at the violin in his arms, and he froze. A god Tool? The violin of Mechirasa has just a single god ability, to change very beasts it attracts into that of draconic blood. No beast can resist being enchanted, unless, of course, it is also being blessed by another god Tool, essentially a god beast, she explained. It is just like my system's ability, Ryuk noticed. The Draconic Pets evolution system was a module created by me, from a tiny piece of the violin's string, she said. Its only purpose was to raise one who could further the lineage of Mechirasa, she explained, and his brows creased. Further the lineage? Our divine duty as blessed god of Mechirasa does not just mean watching over the violin. Every beast it enchants is also our responsibility, but sometimes even gods fail in their responsibility, she said, words heavy. I did. The birth of Alvarez made me lose sight of my responsibility. Little by little, I focused on what enchanted him, what made him happy, and the plays from my violin changed to a wrong melody. I forgot about the enchanted beasts under the violin's control. Just like I guessed, Ryuk thought silently. A divine air never fades off completely. Even after I ascended, Alvarez also did the only thing he knew of, which was my wrong violin play. He also never looked the side of the beasts, possessing no soul capable of resonation at all. Thankfully, I already foresaw this from a distant past and created a piece of module, leaving it in a manifest ruin in the outer worlds. My purpose was to create someone who could resonate with the beasts, enough to play the melody of their existence. The melody! Yes, it was the only thing that could bring back the past of what once was. To correct my divine air, she said, and Ryuk's eyes widened as the lights within each golden ball flared to life. Flames flicked across their surface, cracks racing outward until the spheres began to fracture. An ear-deafening roar split the air, followed by a mighty storm of energy that dragged Ryuk backward. He tried to resist but failed, saved only when his body slammed into a tree, pressing him tightly against it and bringing his motion to a halt. Even as his eyes tried to shut, they widened instead, forced open by the sight before him. From the depths of the splintering orbs of golden light, waves of brilliance rippled outward, shrouding everything in a thick cloud of smoke. Shapes began to emerge from that radiance. Gigantic draconic creatures whose forms blotted out nearly all space around them, yet strangely cast no shadow. They came in all forms, ranging across categories both wondrous and terrifying. There were beast dragons, born from wolves, lions, tigers, and even serpents, their natural ferocity magnified by draconic evolution. Others were spirit dragons, once ghosts, fae, or elemental beings, now forced into unstable draconic shells that flickered between raw essence and dragon flesh. The most unnerving were the insect dragons. Scorpions, beetles, and centipedes reshaped into draconic nightmares, their carapace-like scales glinting, wings segmented, and countless eyes glowing with alien malice. And then there were the hybrids, divine or undead dragons. Angels twisted into holy flame-winged monstrosities, and corpses resurrected into skeletal and rotting draconic abominations. Even though Ryuk himself had seen most of them during the time he spent going around and looking into them, it still shocked him to see all of them congregated before him. They reformed, even with flesh and blood, he thought, stunned. They looked no different from living beings of flesh and skin, yet each radiated an aura that pressed down on his heart like a mountain. And yet, despite their terrifying presence, every one of them had lowered their heads to the woman, whose hand currently rested on the head of a dragon. Not just any dragon, the largest of them all, its divine scales constantly shifting colors like living light. Ryuk's throat tightened. If he had to fight with just one of these dragons, it would be a close call, and he wasn't even 50% certain he would survive it. Yet here they were, thousands of them, bowing to a single silhouette. This was power. True power. Did you feel it unfair? The voice cut through the crushing aura, which suddenly lifted from Ryuk's body. He looked down, seeing a pink ripple spreading beneath his feet from the woman's, and it negated the oppressive weight. Find what unfair? He asked. To know the end purpose of it all was only to benefit my lineage, to reawaken the dragons bound to the violin of Mechirasa, and to correct the divine air. Her eyes glimmered faintly as her voice pressed deeper. All your hard work, climbing level after level to the peak, only for the profits to fall into the hands of someone you do not even know. Doesn't it seem a little unfair? Her words made him frown, his brows knitting together. He tried to grasp her meaning, but in the end, unfair? That never crossed my mind at all. She turned slightly, studying him with a curious look. You feel no sting? I don't, Ryuk said firmly. My purpose in climbing levels has always been to help myself, and it already has. Without the system, I wouldn't even be alive today. I'd have been dead long ago. It was the system that allowed him to fight and defeat Ignators Blade. If he had failed back then, he would have been killed by the Fallens. Even if he somehow resisted being killed. Without those attribute points, he never would have grown strong to face Zarkul at all, and only death would have awaited him. With it I grew stronger and faster than most, and accomplished important goals. If my leveling helped you to correct a divine error of yours, then it's only a bonus to me. Besides, I've never liked seeing the dragons treated unfairly. Even if this were the outside world and I came upon a garden like this, I would never have just left it alone, and still try to find a way to release them from their binds, he said, and from his words she sensed not the slightest doubt. So, no, I find nothing unfair, he finished. If anything, I feel grateful for the system's existence, for everything it gave me, and for you, for creating it. Thank you. A faint light flickered in her eyes as she watched him bow his head. She gazed at him for a long moment, then, almost reluctantly, a smile tugged at her lips. You're welcome. Ryuk rose upright, exhaling in relief as his gaze swept across the garden. The draconic beasts had been rebirthed, and the blue lilies had bloomed. The woman herself stood before him, and Alvarez had ascended just as she had told him. The dream he had seen had now been recreated, marking a successful end of whatever his mission here ought to be. You wish to leave, she said softly, as though reading his thoughts. While he would definitely miss the peace and that enchanting aura and beauty this garden had, he couldn't remain here forever. He felt the breeze whistle a bit, and he turned to find her a few centimeters away, her hands reaching out. Ryuk stretched out the violin he held and passed it back to her. But then, when she took hold of the violin, she plucked off one of the 5 strings and passed it to him. Ha! Ryuk blinked, confused, but he still accepted it. The moment it touched his palm, light coalesced. In barely 5 seconds, the string exploded with brilliance, blinding him completely. When his vision cleared, he gasped. Another violin now rested in his hands, an exact replica of the one she still held. But unlike hers, this one didn't feel cold to the touch or foreign. Felt like the difference between holding something borrowed and holding something crafted for him alone. The violin of Mechirasa you hold is a lesser version of mine, she said calmly. It is weak now, but it can grow stronger. As her words echoed, she began to rise, her body lifting off the ground, floating higher and higher into the sky. And as she ascended, so too did the dragons, following her lead. Hay rose together into the sky, which split into a vast golden-blue vortex above. Her voice resonated across the garden as she vanished into the light. This garden of Mechirasa, from today on, is also yours. Within it, the growth of your contracted pets will improve tremendously, no matter their elements. The dragons that once rested here made this possible. Her presence grew fainter as she faded completely, but Ryuk picked up on her final words. And if one day you ever possess enough power to break through your reality, the doors of the lineage of Mechirasa will be open to you, Ryuk Null.